The ledgers smelled of dust and decaying paper, a scent Constance Severn knew better than perfume. She sat at the small, scarred desk in the corner of her uncle's study, the same desk she had occupied for 2 years, ever since her father's passing had rendered her an orphan and a ward. In the house of her uncle, Gregory Jardine, she was less a niece and more an unpaid clerk, a silent fixture who balanced his books, penned his letters, and endured his casual cruelties with a composure that infuriated him. Tonight, the numbers swam before her eyes, a testament not to commerce, but to slow, deliberate theft. For 2 years, she had watched him bleed the Marley wool mill dry, the very mill her father had managed with fierce pride for 30 years. The mill was the town's heart, and the heart was failing. A log shifted in the hearth, and Constance flinched, her hand tightening on her pen. Her uncle entered, smelling of brandy and self-satisfaction. "Still scribbling, girl?" he asked, his voice thick. "You can put those away. They'll be of no use soon." Constance did not look up. She dipped her pen and made a final, precise entry. "The quarterly accounts must be balanced, Uncle." "Accounts?" He gave a short, barking laugh. "The only account that matters is the one that says the mill is finished. The new Duke has finally seen sense. He arrives at Kestrel Chase tomorrow. His man of business sent word. He is coming to Marley to personally oversee the closure." The pen in Constance's hand stopped moving. Closure. The word was a physical blow, a stone in her chest. She thought of the weavers, the dyers, the spinners. She thought of Hob, the gruff foreman who had worked alongside her father since they were both boys. She thought of the cottages, the families who depended on the looms that were already falling silent, one by one. Her uncle was smiling, a predator's gleam in his eye. He had been buying up the debt of the local farmers, waiting for the mill to fail so he could foreclose on their properties. Its closure was the cornerstone of his grubby little empire. "The Duke has not seen the true ledgers," Constance said, her voice quiet but clear in the silent room. Gregory's smile vanished. "The Duke will see the ledgers I present him, the ones you so dutifully prepared, the ones that show a failing enterprise, a lost cause. Your father's sentimental attachment ruined it. I have simply managed the decline." He was lying. Her father's ledgers, the ones she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her stark little room, told a different story. They spoke of profit, of innovation, of a business that had thrived on quality and fair dealing. These new books, the ones her uncle had her create, were a fiction woven from false expenses and redirected funds. "You will be silent tomorrow, Constance," her uncle warned, stepping closer. His shadow fell over the desk, eclipsing the candlelight. "You are a mourner, a dependent. You will act the part. The Duke of Kestrel Chase is not a man for theatrics. He is a soldier, they say. A cold, hard man who has inherited a title he never expected and a dozen failing properties he has no time for. He will want this business concluded swiftly. You will not speak unless spoken to, and you will not offer any opinions. Is that understood?" Constance finally lifted her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes, a plain, steady gray, held no fear, only a deep, weary resolve. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. "I understand what you have told me to do, Uncle." His lips thinned. He despised her composure. He would have preferred hysterics, begging. It would have affirmed his power. Her quiet dignity was a constant, infuriating rebuttal. He grunted and turned away, heading for the brandy decanter. "See that you do. Your future, such as it is, depends on my goodwill." Left once more in the circle of candlelight, Constance looked down at the ledger. She saw not the columns of false numbers, but the faces of the people they represented. She thought of the unique blue dye her mother, an amateur botanist, had perfected from woad and a secret mordant, a color that had made the Marley cloth famous a decade ago, before her uncle had declared it too expensive to produce. She thought of her father's handwriting, so clear and honest in his old journals. And she thought of the new Duke, this cold, hard soldier who was coming to sign the death warrant of her home. She had no beauty, no fortune, no connections. All she had was the truth, locked in a dusty box and written in a dead man's hand. And she had a memory that forgot nothing. Tomorrow, she would stand silently in the shadow of her uncle's lies. But if the Duke, this man who prized evidence, asked the right question, she would be ready with the answer. She would be the one thing her uncle could never be: honest. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. The next day dawned gray and damp, the sky weeping a miserable drizzle over the slate roofs of Marley. The Duke of Kestrel Chase arrived not with the pomp of his station, but with the grim efficiency of a military inspection. His carriage was dark, unadorned, pulled by two powerful black horses that seemed to absorb the light. He himself was taller than Constance had imagined, dressed in severe, dark woolens that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. A long, thin scar cut a pale line from his temple to his jaw, a relic, the whispers said, of the wars on the continent. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. Lucien Devereux, the new Duke, had inherited the title 6 months ago upon the death of a third cousin he had met only twice. With the title came Kestrel Chase, a sprawling, neglected estate, and a portfolio of assets that were bleeding money, the Marley wool mill chief among them. He had no sentiment for any of it. He was a man accustomed to clear objectives and efficient solutions. The mill was a problem. Closing it was the solution. Gregory Jardine, sweating in his best suit, met the Duke at the mill gates, bowing and scraping like a courtier. "Your Grace, an honor, a profound honor. Welcome to Marley. A sad day, but a necessary one. We are entirely at your disposal." The Duke's gaze swept past him, taking in the state of the mill yard. The moss on the stones, the slipped tiles on the roof, the grimy windows. His expression, already grim, tightened. "Jardine, you are the manager." It was a statement, not a question. "Indeed, Your Grace. Since the tragic passing of my brother-in-law, Mr. Severn, I have done my best to manage the decline." "The decline," the Duke repeated, the words flat and cold. He gestured toward the main building. "Show me." Constance followed them, a few paces behind, as instructed. She was dressed in a plain gray gown, her hair pulled back severely. She was a shadow, a footnote to the proceedings. She kept her eyes downcast, but she listened. She watched. The Duke moved through the silent weaving shed, the looms standing like skeletons in the gloom. He ran a hand not over the polished wood, but over the rusted gears of a stopped machine. He didn't ask about the workers. He asked about the cost of repairs, the price of replacement parts, the efficiency of the water wheel. Her uncle's answers were vague, full of platitudes and blame for past decisions. Ah, poor Severn. A good man, but no head for business. He insisted on paying for top-quality machinery when cheaper would do. Or, the cost of dyes, Your Grace, has become simply ruinous in recent years. They came to the dye house. The air was thick with the ghost smell of sulfur and old chemicals, but the great vats were cold and empty, save for one, which held a murky, brownish liquid. The Duke stopped, his gaze fixed on the vat. The accounts you sent me mentioned a significant expenditure on Prussian blue dye in the last quarter. Yes, Your Grace, Gregory said eagerly. A terrible expense. The price is extortionate, but it is what the market demands. The Duke dipped a finger into the brown sludge, then rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. He looked at the grimy residue. This is not Prussian blue. This is a cheap iron salt compound. It would turn the wool a dull grayish shade at best, and it would bleed in the first wash. Prussian blue requires a complex chemical process. This is mud. He turned his cold, intelligent eyes on Gregory Jardine. The invoice was for 300 pounds of imported pigment. Where is it? A stunned silence fell. Gregory's face went pale, then flushed a blotchy red. He stammered, "A mistake. A supplier issue, surely. These technical matters, I leave them to my foreman." "Your foreman, whom you dismissed last month," the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. He had read the reports. All of them. His gaze swept the room and landed, for the first time, on Constance. She was just standing there, her hands clasped before her, her expression unreadable. She was part of the tableau, nothing more. But she had been there for the whole charade. He turned his attention back to her uncle. "The cost of woad, Jardine, what was it 2 years ago, per pound, from the Fenwick farms?" It was a test, a scalpel-sharp question designed to probe the depth of the rot. Gregory floundered. "Woad, Your Grace. We haven't used woad in years. Far too rustic, outdated." The Duke's eyes narrowed. He was about to dismiss the man and the whole sorry business when a voice, quiet but utterly clear, spoke from the shadows near the door. 2 shillings and 4pence a pound in the spring, rising to 2 and 6 after the summer harvest, Constance said. The Fenwick contract was for 500 weight, with a discount for prompt payment, which my father always made. Every head turned. Constance felt the blood drain from her face, but she held her ground. She had spoken without permission. She had broken the rule. But the question had been asked, and she knew the answer. She had to speak it. The Duke's gaze fixed on her. It was not a man looking at a woman, but a general assessing an unexpected piece of intelligence. He saw the plain dress, the severe hair, the lack of any artifice. He saw the absolute certainty in her gray eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cutting through her uncle's sputtering protests. "I am Constance Severn, Your Grace," she replied, her voice not wavering. "Daughter of the former manager." Lucien Devereux looked from the stammering, guilty face of the uncle to the calm, steady face of the niece. He looked at the sludge in the vat, and he thought of the neat, plausible, but ultimately false ledgers on his desk at Kestrel Chase. He was a man who believed in evidence, and in that moment, a new piece of evidence had just presented itself, clad in a plain gray dress and speaking in the quiet tones of unshakable fact. "Miss Severn," he said, ignoring Gregory Jardine completely, "you will come to Kestrel Chase this afternoon, at 3 o'clock. We have matters to discuss." He turned and walked out of the dye house, leaving a trail of stunned silence and impotent fury in his wake. The summons was a command, and Constance had no choice but to obey. The ride to Kestrel Chase in her uncle's borrowed gig was a silent, tense affair. Gregory Jardine vibrated with a rage he dared not fully express. "You have ruined us," he hissed as they passed through the grand stone gates of the estate. "You and your wretched memory. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I told the truth," Constance said simply. "The truth is a luxury we cannot afford," he snapped. "Your place was to be silent. He will see this as a conspiracy. He will think I have been hiding assets, and he will press charges." "All because you could not hold your tongue." Constance said nothing more. She knew her uncle was not afraid of being charged with conspiracy. He was afraid of being charged with theft, which was precisely what he had been doing. Her speaking up had not created the problem. It had merely illuminated it for a man who seemed uniquely capable of seeing in the dark. Kestrel Chase was magnificent and melancholy. It was a vast Elizabethan manor of gray stone and mullioned windows that seemed to watch the world with 100 sad eyes. The grounds were overgrown, the gardens choked with weeds, the great house itself exuding an air of profound neglect. It was a mirror of its new master, imposing, battle-worn, and emotionally sealed. They were shown into a library that smelled of leather and lack of use. Bookshelves soared to a carved plaster ceiling, but a fine layer of dust coated everything. The Duke was standing before a cold hearth, his back to them, staring out at the drizzling rain. He did not turn when they were announced. "Leave us," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Gregory Jardine, after a moment of shocked hesitation, bowed himself out of the room, shooting Constance a look of pure venom as he departed. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Constance alone with the Duke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. It was a test of her nerve, and she knew it. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped at her waist, and waited. Finally, he turned. The scar on his face was more pronounced in the gray light of the library. His eyes were not cold, she realized, but weary. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and expected the worst. "Miss Severn," he began, his voice devoid of pleasantry, "I have reviewed the accounts for the Marley Mill. They paint a picture of an entity in its death throes. Your uncle's supplementary report argues for immediate closure and liquidation of all assets to pay its debts." "The accounts you have seen are a fiction, Your Grace," Constance said, her voice steady. "I am aware," he said flatly. "Your outburst today confirmed my suspicions. Your uncle is a fool and a thief. That is his problem. The mill, however, is mine. The fact remains that it is losing money. My man of business has advised me to cut my losses. I intend to follow his advice. The mill will close." The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. Hope, a tiny, foolish flicker, died within her. But despair was a luxury she had never been able to afford. "Your Grace," she said, taking a small, involuntary step forward, "it does not have to be that way. The mill is not the problem. The management is the problem." "A problem I have no interest in solving," he countered. "I am not a merchant, Miss Severn. I have no interest in wool. I want this off my books, which is why you are here." He moved to a massive desk, its surface clear save for a single sheet of paper and an inkwell. "I require someone to oversee the closure. Someone honest. Someone with a precise knowledge of the mill's inventory, its assets, its debts, and its personnel. Someone who can ensure the workers are paid what they are owed, and that the equipment is catalogued properly before it is sold for scrap. Your uncle cannot be trusted to do it. You can. He pushed the paper towards her. I am offering you a position, a temporary one. You will manage the dissolution of the Marley wool mill. You will be paid a fair wage for your work. It will take, I estimate, 3 months. Constance stared at the paper. It was an employment contract. He was offering her the job of burying her own father's legacy. It was the cruelest, most pragmatic form of kindness she had ever encountered. He was offering her a way out, a small stipend to start a new life elsewhere. All she had to do was dismantle everything she had ever cared about. Her first instinct was to refuse, to turn and walk away with her head held high. But where would she go? What would she do? She thought of Hob and the others. If she walked away, her uncle or some other stranger would be put in charge. They would be cheated, their final wages stolen, their dignity stripped. If she stayed, she could at least ensure it was done cleanly, honestly, an honorable funeral. But then another thought sparked, a desperate, audacious thought. He was offering her 3 months. He was offering her authority. He was offering her the keys to the mill. She looked up from the paper, her gray eyes locking with his. I will accept your offer, Your Grace, but on one condition. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his face. You are in no position to make conditions. Forgive me, but I believe I am, she said, a new strength in her voice. You need someone you can trust. I am that person. My condition is this. Give me the 3 months you have allotted, but do not ask me to close the mill. Ask me to save it. Give me 3 months to make it profitable. I will take no wage. My only payment will be the resources to purchase fleece and dye, and the authority to run the mill as I see fit. At the end of 90 days, if the ledgers do not show a clear path to profit, I will do as you have asked. I will close it down myself, and I will ask for nothing. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. The sheer audacity of her proposal hung in the air between them. He, a duke, being negotiated with by a penniless orphan. And on what basis do you make such a claim? What makes you believe you can succeed where your father and your uncle have failed? This was the moment. Constance took a deep breath. Because my uncle never tried, and my father did not fail. He was succeeding. Your Grace, the ledgers you have are a lie, but I have the true ones. She reached into the simple reticule she carried and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. It was her father's private journal from his last year of life. This is not a formal account book, but it contains the real numbers, the real suppliers, the real profits. And it contains something more. She opened it to a page bookmarked with a dried flower. It contains the recipe for Marley blue, a color so unique, so vibrant, that buyers in London paid a premium for it. My uncle abandoned it to cut costs. I can bring it back. Lucian took the book. His long, scarred fingers traced the faded ink of her father's script. He read the notes on the dye, the careful chemistry, the observations on color fastness. He was a soldier. He understood logistics, chemistry, strategy. This was not the sentimental rambling of a failed businessman. This was the work of a craftsman, an innovator. He looked up at her. at the quiet, fierce intelligence in her eyes. He saw no pleading, no feminine wiles. He saw a commander laying out a bold strategy backed by solid intelligence. It was a language he understood. "You are asking me to gamble on a dead man's journal and a girl's ambition," he said slowly. "I am asking you to gamble on the truth," she corrected him softly. "For 3 months." He was silent for a long time, weighing the book in his hand. Closing the mill was logical. It was clean. This was messy. It was a risk. It depended on this one strange, resolute woman. But he had spent his life taking calculated risks. And something about her plain-spoken courage, intrigued him more than he would ever admit. "Very well, Miss Severn," he said at last, his voice crisp. "You have your 3 months. You will have a budget which we will agree upon. You will report to me, and only to me, once a week. I will expect a full accounting. If you fail, the original terms stand. You will oversee the closure." He held her gaze. "Do we have an agreement?" "We have an agreement, Your Grace," Constance said. And for the first time in 2 years, the stone in her chest felt a little lighter. It was not hope, not yet. It was something harder and more valuable. It was a chance. Constance did not return to her uncle's house. There was nothing for her there but scorn and suspicion. With the Duke's stark permission, she moved into the small, damp manager's cottage that sat adjacent to the mill, the same cottage she had been born in. It had been empty for 2 years, and it smelled of mildew and memory. But as she pushed open the door and saw the faint outline on the wall where her mother's sampler used to hang, it felt more like a home than her cold attic room at her uncle's had ever been. Her first act was to call a meeting of the handful of workers who still lingered, drawing a pittance for odd jobs. She stood before them in the cold weaving shed, Hob, the foreman, at her side, his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. There were only a dozen of them left, men and women with weary faces and the ingrained caution of the betrayed. "The Duke of Kestrel Chase intends to close the mill," she began, and a wave of resigned despair washed over the small crowd. She let the weight of it settle before she continued. "He has given me 90 days to change his mind." A murmur ran through the group. Hob snorted. 90 days? And what are we to do in 90 days, Miss Connie? We've no fleece, no orders, and the looms are half rusted." "We will get fleece," Constance said, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "We will clean the looms, and we will make something no one else can make." She held up her father's journal. "We are going to bring back Marley Blue." That got their attention. The older workers remembered. They remembered the pride, the premium prices, the sense of crafting something unique. A flicker of interest, of long-dormant pride sparked in their eyes. The next few weeks were a blur of relentless work. Constance, armed with the small budget the Duke had advanced her, proved to be a shrewd and tireless manager. She did not sit in an office. She was on the mill floor, her dress smudged with grease, her hands stained with dye. She bypassed the usual wool merchants who had been overcharging her uncle for years and went directly to the hill farmers, negotiating fair prices for their best fleeces. She spent hours in the dusty archives of the mill, poring over her father's old diagrams, learning the eccentricities of each loom. Her greatest challenge and greatest triumph was the dye. The recipe in her father's journal was a starting point, but her mother's notes, which she found tucked into an old book on herbs, were the key. It was a complex process involving fermented woad, potash from burned ferns, and a secret mordant that involved iron filings steeped in rainwater for a specific number of days. The first few attempts were failures, resulting in bolts of cloth that were a disappointing gray or a streaky pale blue. The workers grew discouraged. "It's no use, Miss Connie," Hobbs said one evening as she stared into a vat of murky liquid. "The knowledge died with your folks." "No," Constance said, her jaw set. "We're missing something." She stayed up all night, cross-referencing her father's journal with her mother's notes, her mind a whirl of chemistry and memory. She remembered her mother talking about the hardness of the water, how the water from the upper spring was sweeter. The next morning, she had Hob and two others haul barrels of water from the spring high on the hill above the mill, bypassing the main cistern. They prepared the vat again. This time, when the woolen cloth was lifted from the dye, it was a revelation. It was a deep, luminous blue, the color of a twilight sky, with an almost velvety depth. It was Marley blue. The workers stared. Then a slow cheer went up. It was the sound of belief returning. True to his word, the Duke arrived every week for his inspection. He would ride up on his black horse, a solitary, imposing figure. He would walk through the mill, his expression unreadable. He said little, but Constance noticed he saw everything. He saw the newly scrubbed floors, the oiled machinery clattering back to life, the growing stacks of finished cloth. He would review her ledgers in the small cottage, his scrutiny intense. Her books were a model of clarity, every penny accounted for. "Your fleece costs are 20% lower than the figures your uncle submitted," he remarked one afternoon, tapping a column with his finger. "I go to the farms myself, Your Grace. I don't use a middleman. And your yield per fleece is higher. We are using the combing machines my father installed. My uncle let them fall into disrepair because they required skilled operators." He looked at her, his gaze lingering. She was thinner, her hands were rough and calloused, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there in the library. She was not just surviving, she was creating. He noticed other things, too. A stray lurcher dog, thin and scarred, had attached itself to the mill. The workers fed it scraps. Constance had given it a name, Patch. The dog was never far from her side, a silent, loyal shadow. The Duke, a man who had known the loyalty of animals in the chaos of war, understood the significance. One day, he arrived to find her not in the office, but personally supervising the loading of a small cart. "An order?" he asked, dismounting. "A small one, for the tailor in Kingsbrook," she said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "He remembered the old Marley blue. He wants to see if the quality is the same." "And is it?" "It is better," she said simply. As he was leaving, he paused. "The cottage. The roof leaks." Constance was taken aback. "It is a minor matter, Your Grace. It will weaken the timbers. I will send a man from the estate to see to it." It was not an offer. It was a statement of fact. He rode away without another word, leaving Constance staring after him, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It was the first time anyone had shown concern for her physical comfort in years. The cold, hard Duke had noticed her leaky roof. The transformation was not just happening in the mill, it was happening in the small, quiet space between them. The weekly inspections began to feel less like inspections and more like visits. They would talk, ostensibly about wool and dye and accounts, but their conversations would sometimes drift. He asked her about her father, and she spoke of him with a love that was free from the pain of fresh grief. She learned, in clipped, spare sentences, that the Duke, Lucian, had spent 10 years in the army, that he had a younger sister who was married and lived in London, and that he found the inherited duties of his title to be an ill-fitting coat. The silence in the cottage was no longer heavy, but comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of two lonely people who found solace in purpose and work. The mill was humming, the town was watching, and for the first time, the future felt not like a threat, but a possibility. The revival of the Marley Mill did not go unnoticed, and not all the notice was welcome. The first sign of trouble was a shift in the social temperature of the town. When Constance went to the market, conversations would hush. The wives of the merchants who had once greeted her with pity now offered cool nods. Whispers followed her like a foul odor. They said she had bewitched the Duke. They said her sudden rise was unnatural, improper. They insinuated that her weekly meetings with the Duke at the cottage were not about accounts. Constance felt the sting of the gossip, but refused to let it show. She had work to do. An important order had come in, the largest yet, from a draper in the city of Bath who supplied the fashionable elite. It was for 50 bolts of Marley blue, a commission that would clear all their initial debts and finally, definitively, put the mill in profit. Its success would be the unanswerable argument she needed to present to the Duke. The source of the whispers was not hard to trace. Mr. Fletcher Vaughan, a neighboring landowner with a smooth tongue and an even smoother ambition, had made no secret of his desire to purchase the mill's land. He had envisioned turning the river meadows into watercress beds, a far more genteel and, he believed, profitable enterprise. Constance's success was a direct threat to his plans. He was a man who moved in the drawing rooms and hunting lodges of the local gentry, and his weapon was the well-placed rumor. He found a willing and bitter ally in Gregory Jardine. Cast out from the mill and publicly humiliated by the Duke's preference for his niece, Jardine was consumed by a spiteful rage. He saw Constance's success not just as a financial loss, but as a personal judgment on his own character. He fed Vaughan stories, exaggerating Constance's authority, twisting her weekly meetings with the Duke into something sordid. "She has him wrapped around her little finger," Jardine would say over port in Vaughan's study. "An unmarried woman, living alone, entertaining a Duke in her cottage. It's a scandal. He's so besotted he doesn't see how she's robbing him blind. All that talk of profit? She's lining her own pockets, mark my words." Vaughan listened, his handsome face a mask of polite concern. "A terrible business," he would murmur. "The Duke is new to our ways, a soldier. Perhaps he doesn't understand the delicate matter of a woman's reputation. Or a man's." Their campaign of slander escalated. Vaughan began to subtly poison the well with the mill's suppliers. A carter with a delivery of fleece would arrive 2 days late, claiming he'd been warned that the mill's credit was no good. A shipment of potash was found to be adulterated with sand, spoiling an entire batch of dye. These were pinpricks, designed to harass and delay, to make Constance's management appear incompetent. Constance weathered these attacks with quiet fortitude, finding solutions for every problem, her mind growing sharper with each challenge. She documented everything, her ledgers becoming not just a record of accounts, but a testament to her struggle. But Vaughan and Jardine knew the Bath order was the key. If that order was successfully completed and paid for, Constance would be unassailable. The Duke would make her position permanent. The mill would be saved. Their opportunity to crush it would be gone forever. They needed to move from slander to sabotage. The plan was cruel in its simplicity. The 50 bolts of perfect, luminous Marley blue cloth were finished and stacked in the drying shed, awaiting collection by the carrier. They represented weeks of painstaking work, the culmination of all their hopes. The night before the carrier was due, a figure slipped through the darkness of the mill yard. He carried a heavy stone jug, not of water, but of vitriol, a powerful corrosive acid purchased from a disreputable chemist in a distant town. Working quickly in the moonlight, the saboteur uncorked the jug. He didn't need to destroy all the cloth. He just needed to ruin the shipment. He splashed the acid carefully across the topmost bolts, the corrosive liquid eating into the fabric, bleaching the beautiful blue to a sickly, mottled yellow, and weakening the fibers until they crumbled at a touch. To complete the deception, he left a small, forged delivery note on the floor, made out on paper similar to that used by the mill. It was for the purchase of a cleaning agent, signed with a crude approximation of Constance's signature. The next morning, it was Hob who found the damage. His roar of fury and despair brought Constance running. She stopped dead in the doorway of the drying shed, her hand flying to her mouth. The sight was one of desecration. The beautiful cloth, their masterpiece, was ruined. Streaks of ugly chemical yellows scarred the deep blue. The acrid smell of the vitriol hung in the air, a testament to the hatred that had been poured out in the night. The workers gathered behind her, their faces a mixture of shock and devastation. All their work, all their hope, lay in tatters. "It's over," one of the weavers whispered, his voice cracking. "We're finished." Constance felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was no accident. This was an attack, aimed directly at the heart of everything they had built. She knelt and touched the ruined cloth. The fibers disintegrated under her fingers. As she stood up, her eyes scanned the floor. She saw the folded piece of paper near the door. She picked it up. A receipt for a cleaning agent, signed with her name. It was a plant. A piece of poison evidence left for someone specific to find. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, exactly who that would be. At that moment, she heard the sound of a horse's hooves clattering into the mill yard. It was Thursday. The Duke had arrived for his weekly inspection. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Lucien Devereaux dismounted, his mood lighter than it had been in years. The weekly ride to Marley had become the anchor of his week. He found himself looking forward to it, to the quiet satisfaction of seeing the mill come alive, and to the even quieter satisfaction of his conversations with Constance Severn. He respected her. It was a simple, solid fact, like bedrock. He respected her mind, her resilience, her utter lack of artifice. It was a feeling he had not experienced often, and never with a woman. He was beginning to realize that what he felt was more than respect. But he was a man who moved slowly, deliberately, and he was not yet ready to put a name to the emotion. His good mood evaporated the moment he stepped into the mill yard. He saw the cluster of silent, defeated workers outside the drying shed. He saw Hobbs' thunderous face. And he saw Constance, standing alone, a piece of paper in her hand, her face pale, but her back ramrod straight. "What has happened?" he asked, his voice sharp. Without a word, Hob gestured toward the shed.
Lucian strode past him and stopped, his eyes taking in the scene of destruction. He knelt, just as Constance had, and examined the ruined cloth. He sniffed the air. Vitriol, he said, the word a curse. He had seen its effects on the battlefield, on human flesh. To see it used on something so beautiful felt like a personal violation. His gaze fell on the stacks of cloth. The damage was extensive. The bath order, the one she had been so proud of, was ruined. A cold, familiar anger began to build in him. He straightened up and turned to face Constance, who had followed him into the shed. His face was a hard mask, the scar on his cheek standing out stark and white. The soldier had returned. "Explain this," he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of all the warmth that had begun to creep into it over the past weeks. Constance met his gaze without flinching. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her voice was low and steady. "It was done last night. The cloth for the bath order is ruined. Someone broke in and poured acid on the bolts." He saw the paper she was holding. "What is that?" She handed it to him. He read the forged receipt. A muscle in his jaw twitched. The evidence was crude, but damning to a casual observer. A manager purchasing a powerful chemical, a ruined shipment, a plausible motive of incompetence or a desperate attempt to hide a flaw in the product. It was a carefully constructed narrative of failure, and it was aimed directly at her. This was the moment of crisis. He could retreat behind the walls of his rank and his suspicion. He could see this as proof that his initial cynical judgment had been correct, that entrusting his investment to an inexperienced woman was a fool's errand. He could believe the evidence of the paper in his hand.
Fletcher Vaughan's insinuations, which had reached him through the county grapevine, echoed in his mind. An unmarried woman. An improper influence. He could end this experiment, cut his losses, and close the mill as he had always planned. It would be the logical thing to do. But Lucian Devereux was also a man who had learned to trust his gut on the battlefield, to see past the smoke and confusion to the heart of the matter. He looked away from the damning paper and at the woman standing before him. He saw her pale face, the faint tremor in her hands that she fought to control. But he also saw the absolute clarity in her gray eyes. There was no guilt there, no fear of discovery, only devastation and a righteous, simmering anger. "I did not write this," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "I did not buy this chemical. I would never be so careless as to leave it where it could be misused. This was done by someone who wants the mill to fail." He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. He thought of her meticulous ledgers. He thought of her calloused hands. He thought of her talking about the sweetness of the spring water. A woman who paid that much attention to detail did not suddenly become a reckless fool. A woman who had rebuilt this place with her bare hands did not suddenly decide to destroy it. The paper was a lie. Her character was the truth. He had to choose which one to believe. He folded the forged receipt and tucked it into his coat pocket. "I know," he said. Just 2 words, but they were everything. They were a bridge across the chasm of doubt that had opened between them. It was not a declaration of faith, but a statement of fact. "I know." It was an acknowledgement of her character, a validation of everything he had come to see in her.
Constance felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. He believed her. He had looked at the evidence designed to condemn her, and he had chosen to believe in her instead. The Duke's face was still hard, but the coldness was no longer directed at her. It was focused outward, a weapon being honed. This was not random vandalism, he said, his mind already working, analyzing, forming a strategy. This was a targeted attack. Who knew the importance of the Bath shipment? Everyone at the mill, Constance admitted, and likely half the town. I was proud of it. Pride is not a fault, Miss Severn. It is a target for those who have none. He began to pace the length of the shed, his steps precise and measured, a caged tiger. The saboteur was clumsy. They used too much acid, leaving a smell that is unmistakable. They left this, he tapped his pocket, a planted clue. Amateurs. Who benefits most from your failure? Mr. Vaughan wishes to buy the land, Constance said. And my uncle hates that I have succeeded where he failed. Vaughan and Jardine, the Duke mused. A peacock and a jackal. A likely partnership. His eyes narrowed. They have made a mistake. They believe they have destroyed you. They think I will react as a disappointed investor. They do not understand that they have not merely spoiled some cloth. They have made this personal. He stopped pacing and stood before her. The full force of his authority, the power of a duke who was also a battle-hardened commander, was now bent to a single purpose. We will not be defeated by this. We will find the culprit, and we will see them punished. But first, we will fulfill the Bath order. Constance stared at him. But how? The cloth is ruined. It will take weeks to spin, weave, and dye a new shipment. We will miss the deadline. Our reputation will be destroyed before it is even made. We will not be making a new shipment, Lucian said, a glint of steel in his eyes. We have 50 bolts of ruined cloth. You are a chemist, Miss Severn. Is there a way to reverse this? To neutralize the acid and re-dye the fabric? No, Your Grace, Constance said, shaking her head. The fibers are destroyed.
It's useless. Not useless, he corrected. Repurposed. He picked up a piece of the damaged cloth, feeling the brittle texture. This cannot be sold as prime Marley blue, but can it be sold as something else? What happens if you dye over this mess? What color does it become? Constance looked at the ugly yellow stains, her mind racing. The vitriol had bleached the cloth, stripped it of its glorious blue. To dye over it would be a gamble. The damaged parts would take the dye differently. It would be mottled, uneven, not the perfect, uniform color they prided themselves on. It would be inconsistent, she said slowly. Perhaps a deep black or a dark gray, but it would not be uniform. It would be marked. Marked, the Duke repeated, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. Like a battle scar. Like this. He touched the pale line on his own face. Some people, Miss Severn, value character over perfection. We will not hide the damage. We will embrace it. You will create a new dye, a deep storm gray. We will call it kestrel gray. We will write to the draper in Bath, explain that an act of industrial sabotage has altered his order, and we will offer him, at a reduced price, a unique, one-of-a-kind cloth, born from an attack and forged into something new. A story he can tell his wealthy clients. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, creative energy. "Can you do it, Miss Severn?" Constance looked from the ruined cloth to the Duke's resolute face. He was not retreating. He was counterattacking. He was turning their greatest disaster into a new opportunity. And he was including her in that we. A partnership, forged in crisis. A new strength flooded her, pushing aside the despair. She could do this. They could do this. "Yes, Your Grace," she said, her voice ringing with renewed conviction. "I can." The week that followed was a campaign. While Constance and her workers labored feverishly in the dye house, experimenting with iron salts and oak galls to create the perfect shade of kestrel gray, the Duke waged a quieter war. He sent a carefully worded letter to the draper in Bath, a masterpiece of understatement and intrigue. He did not beg for patience. He offered an exclusive opportunity. He described the sabotage not as a disaster, but as the birth of a new, unique product, implying that the resulting cloth, with its patina of resilience, would be a collector's item. Meanwhile, he began a subtle investigation. He did not go to the local constable, who was in Fletcher Vaughan's pocket. Instead, he used his own people. His valet, a former sergeant major with an eye for detail and a network of contacts in every tavern, was dispatched to Marley with a pocketful of silver and instructions to listen. His gamekeeper, a man who knew every track and trail for miles, was tasked with quietly inquiring about the movements of Vaughan's staff on the night of the attack. Constance, for her part, worked a miracle. The process was difficult. The acid-damaged fibers reacted unpredictably to the new dye. But through careful trial and error, she perfected a method. The resulting cloth was extraordinary. It was a deep, complex gray, shot through with subtle, darker threads where the vitriol had done its work. It was not uniform, but it was beautiful, like the color of a stormy sea. Each bolt was unique, bearing the scars of its creation. Kestrel Gray was born. As the last bolt was finished and packed, a reply came from Bath. The draper was intrigued. The story was irresistible. He would accept the shipment of Kestrel Gray. The order was saved. A quiet celebration was held in the mill yard. Constance provided bread and cheese, and Hob procured a barrel of ale. The workers, who had been on the brink of despair a week earlier, were now buoyed by a fierce collective pride. They had faced disaster and had triumphed. As Constance stood watching them, Patch the lurcher leaning against her leg, she felt the Duke's presence beside her. "You have done well, Miss Severn," he said, his gaze on the laughing workers. "We have done well, Your Grace," she corrected him softly. He turned to her, and the formal title suddenly felt absurd between them. "Lucian," he said. "My name is Lucian." "Constance," she replied, her heart giving a small, unaccustomed leap. It felt like an exchange of vows. "Constance," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "My valet has learned something. A stable hand in Vaughan's employ, a lad named Jem, was seen boasting in a tavern about a secret errand that earned him a gold sovereign. He was also seen near the mill path on the night of the attack." "It's not enough for proof," Constance said, her brief elation tempered by caution. "No," Lucian agreed. "It is not. Proof must be public and undeniable. He looked towards the grand house of Kestrel Chase, visible on the distant hill. I believe it is time I hosted a small gathering to formally announce the bright future of the Marley Mill. His invitation caused a stir in the county. The Duke of Kestrel Chase, who had until now remained aloof, was hosting a reception. The invitation list was a careful mix of the local gentry, merchants from Marley and the surrounding towns, and key figures of authority. Fletcher Vaughan and Gregory Jardine were, of course, invited. To exclude them would be to show his hand. Magistrate Abbott, a stern, incorruptible old man with a deep respect for the law, also received a personal note from the Duke, requesting his attendance. The night of the reception, Kestrel Chase was transformed. For the first time in years, the great house was ablaze with light. Fires roared in the hearths, beeswax candles cast a warm glow, and servants moved through the rooms with trays of wine and food. The house, like the mill, was coming back to life. Constance arrived, not on the arm of the Duke, but as a guest in her own right. She wore a simple, elegant gown, not of Marley blue, but of the new Kestrel grey. The fabric shimmered in the candlelight, its subtle, scarred pattern a quiet statement of defiance and survival. She was nervous, but as she entered the great hall, Lucian met her at the door. He took her hand, his touch firm and reassuring. "Courage," he murmured, for her ears only. Vaughan and Jardine were in their element, circulating, accepting congratulations on the mill's apparent success as if it were their own. Vaughan approached Constance, his smile predatory. "Miss Severn, you are the talk of the county, a remarkable turnaround. One might almost call it miraculous." "I believe in work, Mr. Vaughan, not miracles," Constance replied, retrieving her hand from his unwelcome grasp. Later, after the guests had eaten and drunk, Lucian gathered them in the long gallery. He stood before a grand fireplace, Constance at his side. He began by thanking them for coming, his voice calm and authoritative. He spoke of his initial intention to close the mill, and of the person who had changed his mind. "Miss Constance Severn," he said, his gaze finding hers, "showed me that the value of Marley was not in its land or its machinery, but in its people and their skill. Through her tireless efforts, the mill is not only solvent, it is on the cusp of becoming the most innovative wool producer in the region." A polite murmur of applause went through the room. Gregory Jardine looked apoplectic. Fletcher Vaughan's smile was fixed, but his eyes were cold. Lucian let the applause die down. "However," he continued, his voice hardening, "this success has bred a venomous jealousy. As many of you have heard, our first major shipment was recently the subject of a cowardly act of sabotage." A hush fell over the gallery. Vaughan stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. "A dreadful business, Your Grace. Simply dreadful."
It shows the folly, perhaps, of placing such a complex enterprise in delicate hands. A woman's management, however skilled, can attract unfortunate complications. "Indeed," Lucian said, his eyes like chips of ice. "It can. But the complication is not, as you suggest, Miss Severn's gender. It is greed." He turned to the crowd. "The saboteur attempted to frame Miss Severn for his crime, leaving behind a forged document." He produced the fake receipt from his coat. "A note for the purchase of a chemical agent signed with a forgery of her name. He was clumsy. He used the wrong sort of paper." Lucian paused, letting the silence stretch. "I have since consulted a paper maker. The paper used for this forgery is a high rag content linen paper,
expensive, and uncommon. It is not the standard trade paper the mill uses. In fact, there is only one gentleman in the district who orders his personal stationery from this specific London supplier. Lucian's gaze swept the room and landed, with surgical precision, on Fletcher Vaughan. "Isn't that so, Mr. Vaughan?" Vaughan's face went ashen. He sputtered, "This is an outrage! An accusation without proof!" "Oh, there is proof," Lucian said softly. At that moment, a side door opened, and Magistrate Abbott entered. With him was Jem, the pale and terrified stable hand. "This boy," the magistrate announced in his booming voice, "has made a full confession. He was paid 1 gold sovereign by Mr. Vaughan's man of business, on Mr. Vaughan's explicit instructions, to throw a jug of vitriol on the cloth at the Marley Mill. The man of business, fearing exposure, has also confessed and implicated his master." The gallery erupted in gasps and whispers. Fletcher Vaughan looked around, his eyes wild, seeking an escape. But he was surrounded. The faces that had been so friendly moments before were now hard with judgment. His social world had just collapsed around him. "And you," Lucian said, his voice dropping, turning to the trembling Gregory Jardine. "The man of business also confessed that you were the one who suggested the plan, that you provided the details of the shipment and the layout of the mill." Jardine crumpled, his face a mask of sweaty terror. "He lies! It was all Vaughan's idea! I am a victim here!" "You are a fool and a co-conspirator," Magistrate Abbott declared, "and you will both answer for it before the law." He nodded to 2 burly men who stepped forward and took Vaughan and Jardine by the arms. The public reckoning was swift, brutal, and complete. As the 2 men were led away in disgrace, the crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock and righteous satisfaction. Constance Severn stood vindicated, her quiet dignity shining brighter than all the candles in the room. After the last of the shocked and gossiping guests had departed, a profound silence settled over the great hall of Kestrel Chase. The servants moved quietly, clearing away the remnants of the party, their movements respectful, almost reverent. The drama of the evening hung in the air, a charge of electricity that had not yet fully dissipated. Constance stood by the grand fireplace, tracing the pattern of the kestrel gray fabric of her gown. She felt strangely calm, the turbulent emotions of the night settling into a quiet, deep sense of peace. It was over. The fight was won. Lucian dismissed the last of the staff with a quiet word. He walked across the vast expanse of polished floor until he stood before her. The firelight played across the planes of his face, softening the scar, warming the winter sky of his eyes. The Duke was gone. Only the man remained. "Are you well?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," she said, and was surprised to find it was the simple truth. "I feel quiet." "A good word for it," he said. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take a fold of her sleeve between his thumb and forefinger, feeling the unique texture of the kestrel gray cloth. "They tried to destroy you with poison," he murmured, his gaze intense. "And instead, you created this. Something stronger, more interesting." "We created it," she corrected him gently. "I could not have done it alone." "No," he agreed, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. "Nor I. Constance, when I came here, to this place, I was a hollow man. I inherited a title I never wanted and a life I did not know how to live. Kestrel Chase was a cold, empty shell, and so was I. I planned to strip the assets, take what I could, and leave. It was all just numbers on a ledger. He let go of her sleeve and took a small step closer. The space between them now felt charged with a different kind of energy, something far more potent than the drama of the public confrontation. "You changed that," he continued, his voice rough with an emotion he made no attempt to hide. "From the first moment, in that dusty dye house, when you spoke the truth so plainly. You are the most honest person I have ever met. You did not just bring life back to the mill. You brought it back to this house. You brought it back to me." Constance's heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She could not look away from him. The world had shrunk to the space between them, lit by firelight. "The mill is yours," he said, the words a simple, declarative statement. "To run as you see fit, not as my employee, as my partner. A full and equal partner in the enterprise. I will have the papers drawn up tomorrow." She should have been elated. It was everything she had fought for. And yet she knew, with a sudden, breathtaking certainty, that it was no longer enough. As if reading her thoughts, he gave a small, sad smile. "But a business partnership is not what I came here to offer you tonight." He took another step, and then, to her utter astonishment, he went down on one knee before her on the cold stone floor of the gallery. The Duke of Kestrel Chase, the decorated soldier, the master of this grand estate, knelt before the penniless orphan he had once intended to dismiss. "Constance Severn," he said, his voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet hall. He did not look up at her, but straight ahead, as if making a vow to the house itself, to the future. "I am not a man for poetry. I have no pretty words. All I have is the plain truth. I have come to admire your intelligence, to respect your courage, and to love your character. I love the way your mind works. I love the way you refuse to be defeated. I love the quiet strength that is more powerful than any army." He finally raised his head, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "I am asking. Answer plainly. I do not wish to be your patron or your employer. I wish to be your husband. I am not offering to rescue you. I am asking you to rescue me from the silence. Will you be my partner, not just in business, but in life? Will you marry me, Constance?" Tears, the tears she had refused to shed in grief, in poverty, in the face of scorn and sabotage, finally welled in her eyes. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected joy. She knelt down in front of him, so their eyes were on a level. Her kestrel gray gown pooled around her on the floor. "Lucian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and gently touched the scar on his cheek. "It was not pity I saw in your eyes that day in the library. It was something harder and more respectful." She mirrored his words from that first fateful meeting. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, breathtaking smile that transformed his stern features. "Recognition," he said. "I recognized a fellow commander." "Then you should know," she said, her own smile breaking through the tears, "that a commander never abandons a partner in the field." She leaned forward, and in the great silent hall of Kestrel Chase, before the portraits of his ancestors, Constance Severn gave her plain answer. "Yes," she said. "Plainly, yes." And he rose and drew her to her feet, and their first kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of quiet, profound homecoming. It was a promise, sealed in the house she had brought back to life, with the man whose heart she had won, not with beauty or wiles, but with the simple, unassailable power of her own worth. Together. 2 years later, the Duchess of Kestrel Chase walked through the bustling market square of Marley. She was not dressed in silks or velvets, but in a well-cut walking dress of a deep, rich plum, woven, of course, at her own mill. The town had been transformed. New cottages were being built, the shops were thriving, and the sound that filled the air was not one of quiet despair, but of busy, prosperous life. The Marley Wool Mill was now the county's largest employer. Its cloth, from the signature Marley Blue to the storied Kestrel Gray and a dozen new shades besides, was sought after across the country and beyond. Constance smiled as she saw Hobb, now the overall millmaster, arguing cheerfully with a supplier, his face ruddy with health and authority. She passed a small dressmaker's shop and saw her cousin, Felicity Jardine, through the window. After her father's disgrace, Felicity had been left with nothing. Constance had offered her a position, not out of pity, but because she saw a flicker of her own mother's artistic talent in the girl's sketches. Felicity now managed the design and pattern office for the mill, her shallow nature burned away by the satisfaction of real, meaningful work. She looked up, saw Constance, and waved, a genuine, happy smile on her face. It was not full forgiveness, but it was a form of peace, a redemption of sorts. A familiar, lanky shape detached itself from a bench and trotted towards her. Patch, the lurcher, now graying around the muzzle, but as loyal as ever, nudged her hand with his nose. A moment later, Lucian joined her, his arm sliding naturally around her waist. "Inspecting your domain, your grace," he teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just admiring our handiwork," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. They stood for a moment, simply watching the life of the town they had rebuilt together. The air was crisp, and the future felt as solid and real as the stone of the buildings around them. Later that evening, they sat in the library at Kestrel Chase. The room was no longer cold and dusty. It was warm, alive, filled with books that were actually read, and comfortable chairs drawn close to the roaring fire. A half-finished puzzle sat on a side table, and a child's wooden horse lay on its side on the thick rug. Constance was looking through a new sample book from the mill, her fingers tracing the different textures of wool. She stopped at a familiar swatch of cloth. Kestrel Gray. Lucian came and stood behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. He was looking not at the cloth, but at the gentle swell of her stomach beneath the plum-colored gown. Their first child, a son, was due in the spring. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "I was thinking about this cloth," she said, holding up the gray swatch. "I was thinking about how something beautiful can be born from damage, how a scar doesn't have to be the end of the story." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her temple. "It is the best part of the story," he murmured against her hair. She turned her head, her lips brushing his. The house was quiet, filled with a deep and abiding peace. The ledgers were balanced, the town was thriving, and the two lonely, battle-worn souls who had found each other in the ruins of a failing mill had built a life more rich and beautiful than either had ever dared to imagine. Her hand rested on the Kestrel Gray cloth, the symbol of their shared past, and his hand rested over hers, a promise for their shared future. The story was not over. It was just beginning. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.